The Great War, 1914 to 1918. Better check again. Gotta make sure my zoom doesn't get stuck while I'm... Oh, now I gotta do it again because I touched the camera. Okay. Alrighty. So, what we saw, if you watched the playthrough, is one of the most laughably ahistorical things I think I've ever played. However, I have to say I still have great fond memories of this game. It has never met my historical objectives. It's always played ridiculously. And again, so do several other games that I like, that I love. And I certainly loved this at one point. I can't really tell. It hasn't gotten, I haven't played it in over 15 years, I'd say. Almost certainly. So, there are brilliant ideas in this one. What it took from the old World War I SPI game and then blowing it up to a more detailed campaign covering the naval side, the production, all this, trying to capture all of that in one. I love what it's trying to do. It just doesn't work. And it doesn't work mainly because it's trying to put everything on a single value, I think. It may be fundamentally flawed in that way. Now, some people still rate this highly, and I rate it pretty well given what we saw. I think I give it a 7 because I do love the game deep down, and it has such, it has such good memories for me, almost all solitaire plays, and it did capture something that I wanted. I always wanted a little bit more than World War I gave me. Well, now I've got something that's a lot more than that. I don't have anything else in this size and scale and scope that I like better than it. And that sure the hell includes Paths of Glory. I don't find that game particularly enjoyable. But this one is less historical in terms of how it all plays out and what happens. In terms of what your decision making is in it, this one feels, in most cases, a little bit closer to the historical feel than Paths of Glory does. In Paths of Glory, oh gee, should the weather be terrible? Yeah, I will make that happen. It's either that or I can move my units or build a new unit. Yeah. Look, the CDG technique works fine in some cases, but in most games where it's used, it really grates on me where the kind of control that players have over certain aspects of the war. They're gods rather than generals, I mean, they have control of things no general should have, or knowledge of things that no general should have. Either one. Okay, but enough of that. Much saner people than I rate this well. Some of them say things like, this is my favorite World War I game. How can that be? How could they not see these glaring errors? My hypothesis there is they play the scenarios. And that's where this is going to shine. Because the flaws in the economic system, first of all, you never do economic production. Well, you get to produce units, but you never get the snowballing effect of capturing territory, of adding your remainder to your NRC base each 6 months, basically. You never get any of that crap that really causes it to fall apart. You end up with enough points to do in each era more or less what you need to do in that era, more or less what you should have available. It's just it goes off the rails when you try to play the campaign game. And to be fair to the game, if we open up the rule book, The Grand Campaign is under the optional rules with things like multiplayer Great War. I get the feeling that it was never sufficiently play tested. So if what you want is something that gives you a strategic view of 6-month to 12-month periods of World War I, this probably actually is the best thing out there anywhere near this, you know, at anywhere near this range of time scale and for playing time and for the full scope of the war. You're talking about, you know, maybe 2 to 4 hours for a scenario, maybe a little longer for the 12-month scenarios. Who knows? But I think you can get the 6-month scenarios done usually in 2 to 3 hours, probably 4 to 6 hours for the 12-month scenarios. That's a good time slot for playing a game, especially if you're going to sit down and play it opposed with someone. A couple hours somewhere, or a good piece, a good size chunk for a full day game. And I don't think it shows badly under those circumstances, because you don't have the opportunity to snowball the conditions of the production problems. You might see someone's army collapsing at the end of one of these scenarios, but that doesn't seem so bad. You know, hey, I won the war in 1916, but it could have happened. What feels ridiculous is when you start seeing the effects of the accumulated economic influences throughout the war. You know, here we went through a total of a year and 4 months or whatever, and really Russia had fallen already. Yeah, okay, granted, Italy was in the war on the Central Power side, so that was pretty crazy. That's an option essentially that I rolled for and allowed to have happen. But you basically you see something not too different from that in almost every playing, which is that Russia collapses way early. Usually in 1916, I see Russia collapsing. The West can usually hold on, and then eventually it becomes clear that the Germans can't meet the U.S. production if the West does hold on. And that all seems historical except for that early Russian fall. And it's a Russian fall due to military collapse, not due to any kind of political occurrence. There's rules in here to simulate, well, essentially some chrome to throw the Russian Revolution into play on a die roll, and it'll happen eventually. And the Russians will eventually come back in the war if it lasts long enough. I think they have to be a year after the revolution. And then they come back. Or something like that. And again, it's on a die roll. Anyway. For me, the key question for the new print that's to come out would be, did you fix the campaign game? Because I'm not sure, and how? Because I'm not sure it can be fixed. The simple fact that there's one value, one factor, this NRCs or whatever, that count as your manpower, your munitions capacity, your oil production, all this, that, and the other is all abstracted in this. So if you think about Third Reich, manpower is handled by the force pool size. This game doesn't do that. You start with your entire force pool, and units get destroyed permanently when you run out of the appropriate economic power to maintain those units. That makes units that makes, if you win the economic war, you win the military war much more quickly. It has this sort of multiplicative effect on the degeneration you would expect. You would expect that someone winning the economic war would win the military war based on that they'd be able to make more attacks, to move more, whatever. But you wouldn't expect that the manpower would just collapse. Basically the entire will to fight is baked into that number. And that's what doesn't really work. The other games that I'm thinking of, I'm not familiar enough with Paths of Glory to really think about its system too much. But SPI's World War I. You only lose units permanently if you lose them out of supply. Normally, you lose units, they come back 2 turns later, and they just recycle to you. It doesn't have this problem. It doesn't have the full-on collapse that you have here. It also doesn't have as many ways of wrecking the enemy economy. You fight on a table that causes hits like this to your resources, or to the units, but you don't have something like the attrition warfare that can just dump the other guy down so hard and so fast. Usually, throughout most of that game, both sides have some economic capability. And to tell you the truth in this, the game that you saw is an anomaly. If Italy was not on the Central Power side, and they would be coming in to the Alliance fairly soon. They're a breath of new blood to the Alliance when they come in, because those NRCs are so important, and they come in with their 28, or I don't know how many they have in the scenario where they come in, but they come in with, you know, a significant amount of points that just breathes new life into the Alliance and may tip the balance in their favor in terms of the initiative. Not that the initiative's that important. But that gives you an idea of who has the most pointsies. And whoever has the most points is winning the war, basically. Well, if you give them to the Central Powers to begin with, I think you deserve what we saw here. It may not be that believable, though. If you look at something like La Grande Guerre, when I play that with Italy as a Central Power, they have so little impact. They can do so little. Their troops are not bad, but slightly worse than Austrians, maybe. I don't know. They're on par with the Austrians, and they have a small army, and the big problem is the national will puts real limitations on what you can do with them. If you start losing battles, you can't keep grinding them away. You can't just use their economy and sort of, you know, throw it in with everybody else's. And that's what this system does. Without the national will limitation, without the manpower being accounted for separately. This doesn't even account for the blockade directly. The economic system, why is it so crazy? You know, I conquered more points of economy from Russia than Russia has at the start of the game. What that means is that the Central Powers, after Russia surrendered, were getting more points than Russia ever could have. And Russia could get nothing because it's penalized by those points. There's just so many things in this that just don't quite work together, that I think the overhaul would have to be pretty massive to take this beyond a scenario game in terms of working at all historically. But still, I like it, you know, and I can't justify a good reason except that it's fun and it's funny, and these counters came already clipped, you know. That was really cool that, like, they had rounded edge counters. That really pleased me in some ways. There was a lot about this that pleased me. This was probably, you know, nowadays I respect SPI's World War One more, and I got that before I got this, and I liked it. But this was such a step up for me. This was such an improvement that this was the game I came to again and again to play, not that one. But I also like bigger things that cover more. At this point, this game has kind of lost its special place for me because La Grande Guerre does the same better. It presents me with a really crazy, can't quite match the history situation that's really compelling. But if you don't want to go all out and play something, you know, well, first of all, pay $300 and, you know, a monster that's going to take you a month with thousands of counters to get that level of a history, this does a pretty good facsimile of it. And to some extent, that's enjoyable. To the other side, yes, you know, if you play out those scenarios, I think they work pretty well. Now, I've got to say I haven't played any of them except the first one, because I always sit down to play the Grand Campaign. But I can look at how they're designed and say, you know, I know this game well enough to kind of understand things aren't going to go too far off the rails until you throw that economic period into play. The problem, of course, is some things like some of the factors that really kind of drive the game are precisely the ones that drive it off the rails. So the attrition combat. How interesting is it to try to wear the other guy, to try to bleed the other guy's army dry, if you're pretty sure you can't do it completely within the 6 to 12 months of your scenario? How interesting is that to play? I don't know. It certainly gives you a realistic slice, though, and at least in the historical sense, it's more interesting. If you play this without Italy coming in as a central power, first off, you do see a much more reasonable and believable situation. However, the collapse of Russia still happens too quickly. I have not figured out a way around that. Although the Lend-Leases that I was doing in this game might be a good hint towards that. The problem with that, of course, is you're putting the Western Allies in hock to try to keep the Russians in the game. And I don't know if that's worth doing. My experience with the game in the past has been not sending lots of money to Russia and letting them collapse, and still the Entente tends to win. At least they win the war, as they did historically, but with Russia falling a lot earlier. They have some heavy pressure a little early, but they can still eke it out. I'm not sure if I ever tried sending the money to Russia before the way I did this time. If Turkey comes into the game early, it's more expensive. It costs you 2 for 1 instead of 3 to 2, you know, to send money there. And it seems like you can do as much good for yourself by conducting attacks on the Germans who are on the West Front as you can by sending that money over to Russia. Or alternatively, you could bank the money so that you have a big economy when the Germans come in. Now, they're going to have a big economy too, because they just captured Russia and it's worth more than Russia was. Another thing is, you could surrender with Russia earlier than I did. That would help a great deal. Because it's not really number of troops that matters in this game. It's how big your economy is. Now, you're not allowed to surrender until certain conditions are met, but if you surrender earlier, you'll be giving the Central Powers less economic benefit from Russia collapsing. All kind of weird things, and the game that derives out of the sort of more historical entry with Italy coming in as an ally, etc. I think it's more interesting. I mean, it doesn't end in a blowout the way this one did, and it feels a little closer to the historical. The West Front feels pretty good, actually. You have both sides kind of grinding at each other, doing this attrition war, hoping to just eke out enough that they can kill permanently a couple of armies. And then maybe by the time the tanks come in, and you didn't even get to see them, and certainly not the motorized armies. But the tanks are impressive because they throw an extra retreat on a stack, and if the enemy has an entrenched force, at least half the strength points are entrenched, if they get a normal retreat result, you can force them to take the retreat. Otherwise, they have to pay double casualties to ignore the retreat. So you've got these neat choices in it, and there's just so much cool shit in this game that it's so hard to say, oh God, but it's so ahistorical in the campaign. But that's the truth of the matter. But there's a lot to love about it. And if they could just fix that campaign in the new printing, man, yeah, I'd want to get that. Because there ain't nothing that matches this that I know of. You know, it's in that same sort of time scale, time frame. It's a little longer than Paths of Glory. Okay, I'll grant you that. It's 2 full sittings, but it's in between that World War I, say 3 to 4 hour to cover the whole war, and La Grande Guerre, 1 month to cover the whole war. And so to me, that's all kind of, it's something that takes me about a week to play. If I played it out fully, it would have probably taken me the full week. But this one just went so far off the rails. But I really wanted to show it because of the new printing. And in part because I'm hoping whoever, you know, the One Small Step guys, some of the playtesters or something, some of them take a look at this and say, hey, you know, we played the campaign game 4 or 5 times and they've fixed it, and this is generally how they did it. And that would convince me enough that I'd be like, well, yeah, I want this again. I want to give it another shot, you know. I've certainly gotten tons of pleasure out of this game over the years, though, even as flawed as it is. And so it's one that I don't feel like I can recommend but love. And there's so many games like that that I really like, whereas there's games that I can say, you'd probably like this if you're this kind of person, but I'm, you know, lukewarm on it or whatever. This is what I love, but it's badly flawed in the original edition. I'm hoping they fix it.